morning light came reluctantly through the gray clouds that hung over Chicago's south side, stretching pale and cold across the cracked windows of a modest apartment. The city outside was already awake, the distant hum of buses, the metallic rattle of the L train, the bark of vendors unloading crates of fruit onto the sidewalk. But inside, the world moved slower. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. A soft cough came from the bedroom, followed by the slow shuffle of bare feet across the linoleum floor. Amelia Brooks, 7 years old and small for her age, was standing on a chair, carefully spreading peanut butter across 2 slices of bread. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. She didn't like the smell of the hospital bottles on the counter, the way they reminded her that her mother was sick again, but she had learned to ignore it. She pressed the slices together and wrapped the sandwich in waxed paper, just as her mother had shown her. When she heard the familiar weak voice behind her, she turned quickly, smiling with all the determination she could summon. "You shouldn't be out of bed, Mama," Amelia said. Her voice was soft but carried an instinctive note of authority, the kind children use when they try to protect the people who should be protecting them. Lena Carter smiled faintly, her frame fragile under the oversized cardigan. Her once bright curls were thinner now, and her skin had lost some of its glow, but there was still an undeniable grace about her, something that couldn't be erased by illness or poverty. "I wanted to see you off," she said, settling into the kitchen chair with a tired sigh. "You're getting so good at breakfast. Soon you won't need me at all." "I'll always need you," Amelia said quickly, as if the words themselves could fight off fate. She brought her mother the sandwich, but Lena pushed it gently back. "Not for me," Lena whispered. She took an envelope from the pocket of her cardigan and placed it on the table between them. It was a simple white envelope, creased at the edges, the name written in a delicate slanted hand. Marcus Hale, Hale Innovations, Inc. "Do you remember the story I told you," Lena said quietly, "about the man I once loved?" Amelia nodded. It was one of her mother's stories she had half believed was a fairy tale. The one about a man who built things with light, who dreamed in algorithms and city skylines, who had eyes that could see the future. "I need you to take this letter to him," Lena said. "Today. You remember how to get there?" Amelia nodded again, but her small fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "Why can't you go, Mama?" Lena's smile trembled. "Because some roads you have to walk yourself, my brave girl, and some you send love ahead to find home." Amelia didn't fully understand, but she understood enough to know this was important. She slipped the envelope carefully into her backpack, next to her sketchbook and a crayon that had lost its paper wrapping. Her mother pressed a kiss to her forehead, whispering a prayer she had whispered many times before, but never so urgently. "Be kind, be brave, and don't lose this." The day was wind-whipped and gray when Amelia stepped out into the street. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and every step of the cracked sidewalk seemed to echo with her mother's breathing. She watched her breath fog in the cold and pulled her jacket tighter. The city loomed ahead, massive and humming, filled with lives and voices that had nothing to do with hers. But she kept walking. On the bus, people barely noticed her. A small figure with a bright red backpack, legs swinging above the floor. She looked out the window, counting the turns her mother had drawn on a wrinkled scrap of paper. Past the mural of Malcolm X, past the laundromat, then 3 more stops until the skyline sharpened into glass and steel. When she stepped off, the air felt different, colder, cleaner, expensive. The building of Hale Innovations rose before her, like something from another world, 40 floors of mirrored glass, reflecting the dull light of October. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and plants too green to be real. Amelia hesitated at the door, clutching her backpack. She felt the stairs before she saw them. The receptionist behind the wide desk, the man in a suit talking on his phone, the security guard with his coffee. None of them looked like people from her neighborhood. She took a deep breath and walked up to the desk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice almost swallowed by the echo. "I need to see Mr. Marcus Hale." The receptionist blinked. "Do you have an appointment, sweetheart?" Amelia shook her head. "I have a letter from my mama. It's important." The receptionist opened her mouth to respond, but something in the girl's face, maybe the way her eyes didn't waver, or the faint tremor in her hand clutching the envelope, made her pause. "Wait here," she said finally, and disappeared down the hall. Amelia stood still, watching the people move past her like ghosts in business suits. She tried not to feel small, but the ceiling stretched too high. The lights were too bright. She thought of her mother's cough, of the promise she had made, and held her ground. Upstairs in a corner office that looked out over Lake Michigan, Marcus Hale was reviewing a report on product projections when the intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, slightly uncertain. "Sir, there's a young visitor here. Says she has a letter for you." Marcus frowned. "A visitor? From where?" "She didn't say, but she insists it's important." He sighed. His schedule was packed. His mind was already on a meeting with investors. "Tell her to leave it with you." "She refuses, sir," came the hesitant reply. "She said she can only give it to you, personally." He almost laughed, irritated. But something about the phrasing "can only give it to you personally" made him pause. "Fine," he said. "Send her up." When the elevator doors opened and Amelia stepped out, Marcus felt his irritation fade into confusion. The child was small, dark-skinned, her hair in two uneven braids. She looked around the office with a cautious curiosity that didn't belong in this sterile, high-tech space. And when she turned her face toward him, something unexpected struck him deep inside, a flicker of familiarity he couldn't place. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, rising. Amelia nodded, pulling the letter from her backpack. "My mama said I should bring you this. She said it's very important." He took the envelope, hesitated before opening it. "What's your mother's name?" "Lena Carter," Amelia said softly. "She said you'd remember." He froze. The name came like a ghost from a part of his life he had long buried. Lena, the painter he'd met when he was still struggling, when the world hadn't yet become sharp-edged with ambition. He swallowed and tore the envelope open. The letter was short, written in Lena's unmistakable handwriting, elegant, deliberate. "Marcus," it began, "I know this will come as a shock. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to stand in the way of your life, but you have a daughter. Her name is Amelia. She's 7. She's brave. She's kind. And she's everything good I ever had left in me. I'm sick, Marcus. I don't have much time. Please don't let her be alone." The words blurred. He read them again, slower this time, until each one pressed into him like a heartbeat. He looked up at the girl, at the same slope of the cheek, the same warm brown of the eyes. He felt something shifting, something he hadn't felt in years. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough, "does your mama know you came here?" "She told me to," Amelia said. "She said you were important." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had spent years building walls around his company, around his heart. He didn't believe in fate or second chances, but now in front of him stood living proof that life still had the power to surprise him. He cleared his throat. "Do you want some water?" She nodded. While he poured it, he kept stealing glances at her. There was something painfully simple in her presence. No pretense, no agenda. Just a little girl carrying a mother's hope. When Amelia finally left the office, escorted gently by his assistant, Marcus sat in silence for a long time. The city stretched below him, its cold brilliance reflected in the lake, and he felt smaller than he ever had before. He took the letter again, running his thumb over Lena's handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of oil paint and lavender, the same scent she used to wear. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and whispered to no one, "Why now?" But deep down, beneath the confusion and disbelief, something else stirred. A memory of laughter, of a studio filled with light, of a woman who had once painted his portrait and said, "You have the kind of eyes that could love forever, if you let them." For the first time in years, Marcus Hale didn't open his laptop. He just sat there, the letter still in his hand, and watched the gray October sky darken over Chicago. Outside, far from the glittering skyline, a little girl rode the bus back home, the city lights flickering across her tired face. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and whispered a promise to herself. "He'll come," she said. "Mama, he'll come." And somewhere deep inside, though she couldn't know it yet, her words had already begun to take root. Marcus Hale had not slept. The gray morning light leaked into his penthouse like a reluctant confession, brushing against the glass walls and catching the edge of a crystal tumbler left half full on the coffee table. The letter lay unfolded beside it, its creases softened by how many times he had read and reread it through the night. He had built a life measured in precision quarterly goals, strategic mergers, data projections, and now all that careful order trembled in the shadow of 7 handwritten lines. He told himself it could not be true. It was easier that way. There had been women before, yes, but none who carried the same quiet strength as Lena Carter. He remembered the scent of turpentine and jasmine in her old studio, the way she used to hum when she painted. She had believed in him long before anyone else did, when his startup was just a cluttered apartment full of wires and late-night coffee cups. And yet he had walked away. Ambition had been louder than love. The sound of heels across marble drew him back to the present. Victoria Lang entered the room with her usual grace, a perfect silhouette of confidence in a navy suit that cost more than most people's rent. She was holding her tablet, but her eyes went immediately to the letter on the table. "What's that?" she asked lightly, though her voice already carried the faint chill of suspicion. "Something from someone I used to know," Marcus said, careful. He wasn't ready to explain. "Not yet." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "You mean a woman?" He met her gaze and didn't answer. She smiled the way people do when they think they've already won an argument. "I hope she's not asking for money. These things happen once you're on the Forbes list." "It's not about money," he said quietly. That was the moment she understood that whatever this was, it mattered. Her tone changed, softening into something that pretended to be concern. "Marcus, you have to be careful. People will do anything for attention. If this woman is claiming—" "She's not claiming anything," he interrupted. "She's sick, and there's a child." "A child?" Victoria repeated. The single word cracked like ice. He looked at her, tired of the conversation already. "I don't know if it's mine. I just know I need to see her." She stared at him for a long time, then placed her tablet down with deliberate precision. "Do what you have to do," she said at last. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. By noon, Marcus was driving south, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror. He hadn't been to this part of the city in years. The buildings grew smaller, older, their paint peeled by wind and neglect. He parked outside a narrow brick complex that looked almost abandoned. The name on the buzzer was Faint Carter, L. But it was enough. When Lena opened the door, he almost didn't recognize her. The years had left traces where once there had been only light. But when she smiled, it was the same gentle, luminous, painfully familiar. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Then I read your letter again." She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of oil paint and faintly of medicine. On the walls hung canvases in various stages of completion. Sunsets, city streets, faces half-formed from color. In the corner sat a child's drawing of a man and woman holding hands, a smaller figure between them. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, "Me and Mommy and Mr. Hale." Lena noticed his gaze. "She draws everything," she said softly. "It helps her understand the world." Marcus looked at her more closely now, at the tremor in her hands, the scarf covering her head. "You should be in a hospital." "I can't afford one," she said simply. "Besides, I'd rather spend whatever time I have left here with her." Something inside him twisted. He had spent so long surrounded by success that he'd forgotten what real struggle looked like. "Why didn't you tell me before?" She smiled sadly. "You were already building your empire. I didn't want to be the ghost that held you back." He exhaled slowly, guilt catching in his throat. "I could have helped." "You still can," she said. "She needs someone when I'm gone." He looked away. "Don't talk like that." But Lena only shrugged, as if the subject was beyond her control. "I just want her to be safe, Marcus. That's all I've ever wanted." He stayed longer than he planned, helping Amelia with her homework, listening to her chatter about her school and her dreams. She was bright, curious, and full of unfiltered warmth. Every now and then she would look up at him with those same brown eyes, and something unfamiliar stirred in him, something dangerously close to hope. When he finally left that evening, Lena walked him to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. I wasn't sure you would. He hesitated. I'll arrange for a full medical evaluation, a better doctor, and he took a breath. I'll get a DNA test. We both deserve to know. She nodded. All right, whatever the truth is, we'll face it. Driving back to the north side, Marcus tried to focus on the road, but his thoughts were a storm. Could it be true? Could that little girl really be his? He had always believed himself incapable of fatherhood, not just emotionally, but biologically. Years ago, doctors had told him his chances were almost non-existent. The thought that fate might have defied science unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, he arranged everything. The best lab, confidential testing, transportation for Lena and Amelia. Victoria watched from the doorway of his office as he made the calls, her expression unreadable. When he hung up, she crossed her arms. You're really doing this, she said. I need to know. And what happens if it's true? He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. Over the next few days, he found himself visiting Lena and Amelia more often than he had any right to. Sometimes he brought groceries. Other times just sat quietly while Amelia drew pictures at the kitchen table. The child had a way of filling silence with her imagination. Once, she handed him a sketch of the three of them in front of a tall building with shining windows. That's your office, she said proudly. I think it's beautiful. He laughed softly. You think so? It looks like it's made of light, she said. Mama says people who build with light can see through darkness. The words hit him harder than they should have. He began to notice things he hadn't before. The way Lena winced when she stood, the quiet resilience in her eyes, the soft hum of a lullaby she sang under her breath when she thought no one was listening. He admired her strength even as it broke him. A week later, the results were ready. The envelope waited on his desk like a verdict. He stared at it for a long time before tearing it open. One word leapt out at him, negative. He sat there for what felt like hours. The paper crumpled in his fist. When Victoria found him, she didn't ask what had happened. She simply picked up the discarded pages and scanned them quickly. I told you, she said, her tone carefully neutral. People lie when they're desperate. He didn't respond. His mind was already somewhere else. On Lena's face when she had said she didn't want to hold him back. On Amelia's laughter. On how sure he had been when he looked into that child's eyes. He wanted to believe the test was wrong, but numbers didn't lie. Data didn't lie. Victoria placed a hand on his shoulder. You did what you could. Now it's over. Forget them. But forgetting was not as easy as she made it sound. That evening, he drove back to the south side anyway. Lena opened the door, surprised to see him. You have the results, she said quietly. He nodded. It's not what we hoped. She didn't ask to see the paper. She just nodded once, as if she had already expected this. Then at least we know. He wanted to be angry, to accuse her, but looking at her thin frame, he felt only exhaustion. Why did you send her to me then? Because she needed hope, Lena said softly. And so did you. Amelia came out from her room, sensing the tension. Did I do something wrong? She asked. Her big eyes searched his face for answers he didn't have. He knelt in front of her. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. She smiled weakly, but her eyes were wet. Mama's been crying. I thought maybe it was my fault. Something inside Marcus cracked. He couldn't stay. He muttered a goodbye and left, the letter still folded in his pocket like a stone he couldn't throw away. Back at his apartment, the city lights shimmered across the water, cold and distant. Victoria poured him a drink, talking about their upcoming engagement party, but he barely heard her. His mind was full of a child's voice, a mother's quiet faith. He had wanted the truth, and now that he had it, he felt emptier than before. When his phone buzzed hours later, he almost didn't look, but the message stopped him cold. Mr. Marcus, Mama's crying. Did I make you sad too? He read it twice, 3 times, his throat tightening. The world outside his window blurred into streaks of color. He could picture her small hands typing, her earnest face illuminated by the glow of a borrowed phone. He set the glass down, untouched. For the first time in years, Marcus Hale didn't think about profits or projections or headlines. He thought about a little girl who believed in him, and a woman who once painted light into his life. And as the night deepened around him, he realized that the numbers might have lied after all. For several days after receiving the DNA results, Marcus Hale drifted through his routines like a ghost inhabiting a stranger's life. Meetings came and went, signatures appeared where they were needed, presentations were approved, but none of it registered. Inside, everything felt suspended, his mind caught between disbelief and a quiet ache he didn't know how to name. The test results lay folded in a drawer, yet he couldn't stop replaying the look in Amelia's eyes when she had asked whether she'd done something wrong. That question had burned itself into his thoughts, haunting him through every sleepless night. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed invigorated by the outcome. She resumed talking about their upcoming engagement gala, the partnership deal with the tech conglomerate in New York, and the architectural renderings for their new penthouse renovation. To her, the interruption had passed. Life could return to the perfect script she had written for them. But Marcus found it impossible to step back into that glossy world without feeling that something essential had gone missing. He spent more time than usual staring at the skyline from his office window, trying to make sense of the disquiet that would not leave him. The logical part of him wanted to believe what the test said, that Amelia was not his daughter, that Lena had somehow mistaken or deceived him. Yet logic offered no relief. There had been something in Lena's voice, something steady and true, that refused to fit the shape of a lie. He remembered the way she had not pleaded, had not tried to persuade him of anything. She had simply stated what she believed and left the rest to him. When he finally went back to see her, it was under the guise of closure. He told himself he needed to return the test results in person to settle whatever debt remained between them. But when he arrived at the small brick apartment, closure was the last thing he found. The air inside felt heavier, tinged with the faint bitterness of medicine and paint thinner. Lena looked weaker than before, though she still greeted him with that same quiet grace that disarmed him. "I suppose you have the answer," she said when she saw the envelope in his hand. He nodded. "It's negative." She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a small, almost tender smile. "Then that's what it is." Her calmness unsettled him. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," she said softly. "I told you before, I can't prove anything. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe life decided otherwise. But she needed to find you, Marcus, even if it wasn't for the reasons we thought." The simplicity of her words frustrated him. He wanted her to fight, to insist, to show anger or grief, anything that could help him make sense of the emptiness gnawing at him. But she only looked at him with those eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and forgiveness. Amelia peeked out from her room then, cautious at first, but when she saw him, her face brightened into a shy smile. "You came back," she said. "I did," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. She ran up and threw her arms around his waist before he could react. The contact startled him, the smallness of her body pressing against him, the trust that came so easily. For a brief moment, he let himself rest a hand on her back, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Then he gently stepped away. "I can't stay long," he said. "I just wanted to see how you were both doing." Lena thanked him, and though she didn't ask for anything more, he felt the weight of unspoken things between them as he left. Outside, the cold wind hit him like a reprimand. He sat in his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. He didn't realize until much later that he had been gripping the test results so tightly the paper had torn. Days passed. He buried himself in work, but the numbers blurred on his screens. He attended meetings, but his attention drifted. His employees noticed the change but said nothing. Victoria noticed too, though she masked her irritation with carefully measured sympathy. "You did your part," she said one evening, pouring wine as if the gesture could erase the tension between them. "You checked. It's over." He didn't answer. She studied him for a moment, then leaned closer. "Marcus, don't tell me you still doubt it. I just keep thinking," he began, then stopped himself. "No, it doesn't matter." Her tone sharpened. "You're not going to let some woman from your past wreck everything we've built, are you?" That's what she wanted. Attention, money, maybe a lawsuit if she's clever. He looked at her, and for the first time, the sleek perfection of her expression struck him as something hollow. "You don't know her," he said quietly. I don't need to, she replied. I know the type. The words lodged like splinters in his chest. That night he couldn't sleep again. He poured himself another drink, sat by the window, and scrolled aimlessly through his phone. Then, as if conjured by guilt itself, a message appeared. It was from a number he didn't recognize, but he knew instantly who it was from. Mr. Marcus, Mama's crying. Did I do something wrong? He read it over and over, the simple, guileless words breaking something open inside him. He didn't reply. He didn't know what to say. But the next morning, instead of going to his office, he found himself driving south again. When Lena opened the door this time, she looked even more fragile, her face pale and drawn. You shouldn't have come, she said, though her voice betrayed a quiet relief. I got her message, he said simply. Lena's eyes flickered with apology. She worries. She thinks she upset you. She didn't, he said quickly. I just needed time. They sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight filtering weakly through the blinds. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. Finally he spoke. I keep thinking about that test. Something doesn't sit right. Lena looked at him with faint surprise. What do you mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things. But it doesn't make sense. I look at her and... He stopped, shaking his head. Never mind. She reached across the table, her thin fingers brushing his hand lightly. Sometimes truth takes longer to show itself, she said. You don't have to force it. He nodded, though the doubt only grew stronger. Back at his office, he called the lab, asking for confirmation of the procedures. The technician assured him everything had been done correctly, but there was a hesitation in the man's tone that Marcus didn't miss. When he asked for the chain of custody, the technician stumbled over his words before transferring him to someone else. The conversation left Marcus uneasy. That evening, Victoria was waiting when he came home. Where have you been? She asked, her tone sharp under the pretense of concern. Out, he said curtly. Out where? Don't tell me you went back there again. He didn't answer. Her face hardened. You need to stop this. It's done. You have responsibilities to me, to this company, to everything we've worked for. Don't throw it away chasing ghosts. Something in her voice, its calculated control, triggered a sudden clarity. How do you even know where I went? He asked. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? You've been checking, haven't you? My calendar, my driver logs. That's ridiculous, she said, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. He watched her closely now, the pieces slowly fitting together. You said something the other day about women who know how to play desperate. That sounded rehearsed. Marcus, you're being paranoid. Maybe, he said quietly, or maybe I'm finally paying attention. He didn't confront her further that night, but he barely spoke to her after. Instead, he began to dig quietly. A call to a friend who managed private contracts at the lab confirmed his suspicion. Someone outside the authorized parties had requested data verification shortly before the results were finalized. When he asked for the name attached to the request, his friend hesitated before saying it. Victoria Lang. The revelation hit like a cold blade. He hung up, pacing the length of the apartment, fury and disbelief twisting through him. She had paid someone to alter the results. The motive was clear enough: control, reputation, fear of losing him. But the cruelty of it stunned him. It wasn't just a betrayal of him. It was a betrayal of the child who believed in him, of a dying woman's last act of faith. He didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the decision was made. He would confront her, not in private whispers, but in full daylight. When she arrived at the office later that morning, immaculate as ever, he was waiting. We need to talk, he said. She glanced at his expression and knew something had shifted. About what? The test, he said flatly. You changed it. Her smile flickered and broke. That's absurd. I have proof, he said. You paid the lab tech. You forged a false result. For a heartbeat, she looked cornered, then her eyes hardened. I did what I had to do, she said. You were being manipulated. I was protecting you from her, from yourself. By lying, he asked quietly. By saving you, she snapped. You think that woman cares about you? She wants your money, your name. She's nothing, Marcus. Nothing. He felt something cold settle inside him. Don't ever talk about her like that again. Victoria's control finally cracked. You're really going to throw this away for some woman from the South Side and her bastard kid? The word hung in the air like a slap. Marcus didn't speak. He simply turned and walked out. Behind him, her voice rose, sharp and panicked, but he didn't stop. The elevator doors closed on her shouts. Outside, the city stretched wide and alive, and for the first time in months, he felt as if he could breathe. He drove straight to the lab and demanded a retest. No intermediaries, no interference. When the technician hesitated, he wrote a number on a check that made the man's eyes widen. Do it personally, Marcus said, and this time, make sure it's real. Wow. 3 days later, the new results came in. This time, the word that stared back at him wasn't negative. It was positive. Amelia Brooks was his daughter. He sat very still for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. All the years of sterile control, the walls he had built, the loneliness he had convinced himself was freedom. Suddenly it all felt meaningless. There was a child who carried his eyes, his blood, his possibility of redemption. By the time he reached Lena's apartment that evening, his heart was pounding. She opened the door slowly, uncertain at the look on his face. Marcus? He didn't speak at first. He just handed her the paper. She scanned it, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, she whispered. Oh, Marcus. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I should have believed you. I should have believed her. She looked up at him, tears bright in her tired eyes. It doesn't matter now, she said. You're here. He stepped forward and took her hand, and for the first time since the letter had arrived, he felt the ground steady beneath him. Outside, the sky was beginning to soften with the colors of dusk, the faint hum of the city rising around them. Inside that small, worn apartment, something long lost had quietly returned. The evening after Marcus brought the test results to Lena's apartment lingered in his memory like a dream too vivid to fade. He had expected relief, perhaps even joy, but what came instead was a quiet trembling inside him, as though the ground beneath his life had shifted. The truth was out at last, simple and irreversible. Amelia was his daughter. Every doubt that had plagued him, every cold calculation he had clung to, fell away under the weight of that single word positive. It wasn't just confirmation of blood. It was the restoration of something deeper, something he had forgotten he was capable of believing in. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the presence of purpose that wasn't measured in profit or success. It was in the sound of Amelia's laughter echoing down the narrow hallway, in the fragile but grateful smile on Lena's face when he promised he wouldn't leave again. He stayed longer that evening than he intended. They talked at first in fragments, as if learning to rebuild a language they had once spoken fluently. Lena's hands shook when she poured him tea, and his fingers brushed hers when he took the cup. It was an accidental touch, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. She thanked him again, softly, but he could see how much the illness had taken from her. Her skin had grown pale, her movements slow, each breath a quiet labor. He knew then that helping her recover wasn't just something he wanted to do, it was something he owed. Over the next few days, he threw himself into action. Money, connections, expertise. He had them all, and for once, he would use them not for gain, but for healing. He arranged for a private consultation with one of the best oncologists in the state, paid for the transfer of her medical records, and had a car waiting to take her to the hospital whenever she felt strong enough to travel. Lena protested at first, pride flaring in her eyes. I don't want to be your charity, she said. I want to stand on my own, even now. It's not charity, he told her gently. It's family. The word made her pause. It had been so long since she had heard it spoken with sincerity. Slowly she nodded, the resistance in her shoulders softening. All right, she whispered. Family. He began visiting daily, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with small gifts for Amelia books, sketch pads, colored pencils. But the greatest gift he gave was his presence. He stayed through the quiet hours, helping Amelia with homework, listening to her ramble about school and art in her dreams of becoming an architect. So I can build houses that never fall down, she said proudly, showing him her drawings. He smiled, realizing she had inherited not just his eyes but his hunger for creation. Meanwhile, the world he had built in the gleaming towers of Hale Innovations began to look hollow. Victoria's presence still lingered in that space, though she herself had been gone since the confrontation. Her departure had made headlines in the corporate gossip circles, but Marcus didn't care. The investors whispered, the board speculated, yet he met their questions with silence. He was done explaining himself to people who measured worth only in numbers. The scandal, he knew, would fade. Truth had a way of surviving even the loudest lies. When he finally told Lena about what Victoria had done, about the bribery, the falsified results, the manipulation, she listened in silence. Her expression was not one of anger, but of sorrow. She must have been very afraid, she said when he finished. Afraid? He could hardly understand how Lena could summon compassion for the woman who had tried to erase her daughter's existence. People who do such thing, Lena said softly, they're always afraid of losing what they think makes them powerful. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the quiet strength in her that had once drawn him to her. Even illness hadn't dimmed it. She had lost nearly everything, yet her heart was still capable of grace. He wondered if he would ever be that strong. In the weeks that followed, Lena began her new treatment. It was grueling at first. The hospital stays, the medications, the days when she couldn't lift her head. But Marcus was always there. He coordinated with doctors, arranged home care when she refused to stay in the ward, and made sure Amelia was never alone. Some nights he stayed in their small apartment, falling asleep on the couch with files spread across his lap and the sound of Amelia's soft breathing from her room. It was a different kind of exhaustion than he was used to, but one that felt strangely good. For the first time, his tiredness came from giving instead of fighting. Amelia clung to him more with each passing day, sensing the security she had never known before. One night, when Lena had fallen asleep after a long bout of pain, Amelia crept into the living room, where Marcus was working quietly. She climbed onto the couch beside him and rested her head against his arm. "Do you have to go back home?" she asked sleepily. He hesitated. "I am home," he said finally. She smiled at that, a small, drowsy smile that broke him a little inside. When she drifted off to sleep, he stayed still for a long time, afraid that even the slightest movement would wake her. Watching her breathe, he thought about how fragile and resilient life could be at once. How this small, stubborn child had somehow bridged the distance between the man he was and the man he wanted to be. One afternoon, as Lena sat by the window sketching the faint outlines of a sunset, Marcus approached her with a suggestion. "Move in with me," he said simply. "Both of you. There's space, comfort, everything you need." She lowered her pencil, studying him carefully. "And what happens when I'm gone?" she asked. "When she's all that's left?" He shook his head. "Don't talk like that. Marcus," she said quietly, "you can't save me." "Maybe not," he replied, "but I can fight beside you." Her eyes softened, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them was full, not empty, but rich with the weight of things that didn't need words. She agreed to move after her next treatment cycle. Marcus arranged for everything, the transfer of her belongings, the setup of a small art studio in his house, even a bright corner room for Amelia, filled with books and sunlight. The first night they arrived, the city outside was blanketed in soft snow, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel cold. It felt alive. The next morning, Amelia ran barefoot through the hallways, exploring every corner. "It's like a castle," she declared, spinning in delight. "Can we stay forever?" Lena watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. "We'll stay as long as forever lets us," she whispered. The weeks turned into months. Lena's health began to stabilize little by little. The color returned to her cheeks. Her laughter, faint at first, began to fill the rooms again. Marcus would come home late some nights to find her painting by the window, a soft jazz record playing in the background. Sometimes he would stand quietly, not wanting to disturb her, just watching the way the light moved over her face. Once she looked up and caught him staring. "You never used to know how to be still," she said with a teasing smile. "Maybe I finally found something worth slowing down for," he replied. Life began to take on a rhythm, a fragile, beautiful rhythm that none of them dared to name aloud for fear of breaking it. Amelia thrived at her new school, making friends quickly, her drawings growing more ambitious each week. She often brought her sketches to Marcus, seeking his opinion. "What do you think?" she would ask. "Does it look real?" He would study them, pretending to analyze deeply before answering. "It looks better than real," he'd say. "It looks alive." Sometimes late at night, Marcus would find himself standing outside Lena's door, listening for the sound of her breathing, afraid of silence. There were moments when fear still shadowed him, the fear of losing her again, of not being enough, of failing at something so profoundly human. But then she would appear in the doorway, her eyes gentle and knowing, and the fear would fade. The scandal around Victoria eventually reached its inevitable end. She tried to deny everything at first, then to frame herself as the victim of manipulation, but evidence was unforgiving. The company board forced her resignation. The headlines burned hot for a week and then died out. Marcus refused to comment publicly. There was no satisfaction in her downfall, only a kind of weary relief that the truth had been restored. He focused instead on the future he was building, a quieter, truer one. Spring came early that year. On a mild March afternoon, Marcus returned from work to find Lena and Amelia in the backyard, planting something near the fence. The ground was soft and damp, the air full of the promise of renewal. He walked over, curious. "It's an apple tree," Amelia explained proudly. "Mom says every family should plant one, so there's always something growing." Marcus knelt beside her, his hands sinking into the cool soil. "Then let's make sure it grows strong," he said. They worked together until sunset, their hands dirty, their laughter easy. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Marcus felt completely at peace. Not the fleeting satisfaction of achievement, but a deeper stillness that came from belonging. That night, after Amelia had gone to bed, Lena stood with him by the window, looking out at the small patch of earth where the tree stood. "You've given her something I never could," she said softly. He turned to her. "And you've given me something I thought I'd lost." She smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You always were too serious. Maybe now you'll finally learn how to live." He caught her hand and held it. "I'm learning," he said. "One day at a time." The city outside shimmered with lights, but for once, neither of them looked toward it. They had their own light now, fragile but real, flickering quietly in the warmth of the life they were rebuilding together. Spring deepened into summer, and the apple tree in the backyard began to bud. It was a fragile thing, slender and uncertain, yet somehow it stood proudly against the wind. Marcus often found himself looking at it from the kitchen window, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, marveling at how something so small could endure. He had once thought of endurance as strength, the ability to resist, to hold ground. But watching that tree, he understood now that true strength was gentler. It was the quiet will to keep reaching for light, even when the world had been cold for too long. The rhythm of their new life had settled into something that felt almost sacred. In the mornings, Amelia would burst into his room before sunrise, bouncing on the bed until he opened his eyes. "You promised we'd go to the lake today," she'd say, her laughter carrying the warmth of certainty. Lena would follow, half apologetic, half amused, her hair still tousled from sleep. They would spend their days like that, simple, unhurried, their time no longer measured in deadlines, but in the soft unfolding of hours. Lena's health, though still fragile, continued to improve. The experimental therapy had begun to show results. Her blood work was stable, her strength slowly returning. There were bad days, of course, nights when pain flared and fear crept back into her voice. But she faced them differently now. She wasn't alone anymore. Marcus was there, every time, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes he would sit by her bed in silence, holding her hand through the long hours until dawn. Other nights, she would wake to find him asleep in the chair beside her, his head bowed, his hand still resting in hers. It became a quiet ritual, one neither of them spoke about, but both understood. Amelia thrived in this new world that was theirs. Her drawings grew more complex, her notebooks filled with shapes and colors that seemed to tell stories of their own. She had an instinct for beauty, a way of seeing patterns where others saw plainness. Lena often said she was painting through her daughter's hands now, and Marcus could see it too. One afternoon, he found Amelia sitting cross-legged on the porch, sketching the tree. "I think it's growing faster than it should," she said seriously, holding up her drawing. "Maybe it knows we're watching." He smiled. "Maybe it likes the attention." "It's like us," she added after a moment. "It didn't have much when it started, but it's still here." He reached out, smoothing a stray curl from her forehead. "Yes," he said softly, "it's still here." As the months passed, Lena's art returned in full force. She began painting again, slowly at first tentative strokes, small canvases, but soon her apartment studio was alive with color. Marcus would come home to find her lost in the rhythm of creation, her eyes bright, her hands steady. One day she told him she had an idea for a new exhibition. "I want to call it Light Returns," she said, "because it always does, even after everything." He offered to fund it, to book the gallery, but she refused gently. "Let me do this part myself," she said. "It's not about money, Marcus. It's about remembering who I am." He understood, so he supported her quietly instead, calling in favors where needed, ensuring that every detail was handled with care, but without her noticing. When the night of the exhibition finally came, the room was filled with soft music and low conversation. The paintings glowed under the lights, landscapes, portraits, abstract visions of struggle and grace. In each one there was a subtle echo of her journey, and in every corner of color, a reflection of hope. As Marcus watched her move through the crowd, graceful and radiant, he realized how much he had missed the woman she used to be, and how much he admired the woman she had become. When their eyes met across the room, it was as though the years between them had dissolved. He crossed to her, ignoring the murmurs of guests, and took her hand. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," she corrected, her smile soft. Later that evening, when the gallery had emptied and the city lights shimmered beyond the windows, Lena stood beside him quietly. "You've changed," she said, not as an accusation but as a wonder. "You used to look at the world like it owed you something. Now you look at it like it gave you too much." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it did." They drove home in silence, Amelia asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. The streets were quiet, the kind of peacefulness that comes only when the world is tired and kind at once. When they arrived, Lena lingered at the door, looking up at the house. "It's strange," she said. "For years I thought I didn't belong anywhere. Now I think I might have always been heading here." He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then stay." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She didn't answer then, only reached for his hand and held it tightly. Summer gave way to autumn, and the apple tree bore its first small fruit, tiny, green, imperfect, but alive. Marcus picked one and placed it in Lena's hand. "Proof," he said, "that things can grow where you least expect." She laughed softly. "You're getting poetic in your old age." "I'm not old, Kidderone," he protested. "You were," she teased. "Before us." It was on a crisp November evening, months after that night at the gallery, that Marcus finally asked her. They were walking along the edge of Lake Michigan, the air sharp with cold, the sky awash in fading light. The city skyline shimmered behind them, and the sound of waves brushed gently against the shore. Lena's hand was tucked in his arm, her scarf fluttering in the wind. He stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "I spent most of my life chasing things that didn't matter," he said. "I thought success would fill the silence. But it never did. Then you came back, and suddenly the noise stopped. For the first time, I know what I want." He reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. "Stay with me, Lena. Not because you have to, because you choose to." Her eyes filled with tears, not of surprise but of certainty. "I already chose you," she said softly. "A long time ago." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, unadorned except for a single small diamond. It caught the last light of the sunset, glowing faintly in her palm. When he slipped it onto her finger, she smiled through her tears. "You're late," she whispered. He laughed, and the sound carried out over the water, mingling with the wind. The wedding was small, held in the backyard under the apple tree that had become their quiet witness. The air was filled with the scent of blossoms and the gentle hum of bees. Amelia wore a pale yellow dress and carried a basket of white petals, her face alight with pride. When the music began, she walked ahead of Lena, scattering petals as she went, her voice clear and bright as she announced, "The bride is coming." Lena followed, radiant in a simple ivory gown. There was no grand ceremony, no glittering spectacle, just the three of them, surrounded by a handful of close friends and the soft golden light of afternoon. Marcus's voice trembled slightly when he spoke his vows. "I used to think love was something you earned," he said. "Now I know it's something you build moment by moment, with faith and with forgiveness." When he placed the ring on her finger, Lena's hand was steady. "You found your way home," she whispered, "and so did I." As they kissed, the guests cheered softly, and Amelia threw her petals into the air with a triumphant shout. The white fragments caught the sunlight, swirling above them like tiny stars before drifting down to the grass. Later, when the laughter faded and the guests had gone, the three of them sat together under the apple tree, watching the sky fade into twilight. Amelia leaned against Marcus's shoulder, her voice sleepy but content. "Mama said courage means doing the right thing even when you're scared," she murmured. "I wasn't scared today." Marcus smiled and kissed the top of her head. "You were brave," he said. She yawned. "So were you." Lena reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his. "She's right," she said softly. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind that doesn't need filling. Above them, the first stars appeared, faint but sure. The tree swayed gently in the breeze, its branches whispering secrets to the night. Marcus closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of the grass, the faint sweetness of the apples, the warmth of the two souls beside him. For the first time in a lifetime of striving, he felt no need to move forward. He was already where he belonged. The wind carried a single white petal across the lawn, and as it landed on Amelia's lap, she smiled in her sleep. The world was quiet now, but alive in its quietness. Light had returned, soft, enduring, and finally home. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Check out the other videos on my channel, and if you enjoyed this one, share it with your friends.